and welcome to episode 6 of the Agronomists, everybody. Thanks a lot for tuning in here. Real Ag in prime time. We're having a lot of fun with this new show, really honing in and focusing in on agronomic topics. And tonight will be no disappointment, I promise you. We're gonna really talk tonight about on-farm / ag retail research trials. And I, of course, I do the slash and I put it together like that because, you know, we got some farmers that are really keen on the agronomic side of this and trying to do some of their own research. But we also have a lot of our audience that are actual agronomists and they have customers and they're trying to work with some of those customers in doing some of this research as well. So we're kind of doing a bit of a double dip on that one, but some of the same considerations for sure. If you are watching on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, or Twitch, you can be sure to ask your question. We are always taking questions, and that's one of the beauties of this show, makes it so special, is the opportunity for you to interact. And of course, we have this winter where there's not a lot of meetings going on, and a lot of stuff is virtual, but this show is unique in the sense that it is completely live. No recorded presentations. We are going to play some clips out of the Real Agriculture Vault, as we always do, try to break it up a little bit and get some different perspectives. That's going to be a lot of fun tonight as well. If you do want to get your CCA credits, all you have to do is go to realagriculture.com/agronomists, and you can be sure in the morning, it'll be posted in the morning. If you watch tonight's program, hit the button, and you can register for your CCA credits. And there's a few other things there you can qualify for as well. That website is realagriculture.com, agronomists. And of course, if you have any troubles with it, you can always contact me and I will give you a hand. Let's bring in tonight's guest. First up, based out of Southern Alberta, it is Steve Larocque. His company is called Beyond Agronomy. He's, of course, an agronomist, as well as he farms himself as well. So, hey, Steve, how's it going?
Hey, good, Sean. How you doing?
Hey, good, man. Great to see you. It feels like it's been a very, very long time. Also joining us. Yeah, exactly. Also joining us tonight is Deb Campbell, based out of Ontario. Her company is Agronomy Advantage. Hey, Deb, how are you?
Great, Sean. How you doing?
Fantastic. This is great. Well, you know what, Deb, you're going to show Steve how this is done because you were actually a guest on Real Ag Live going back a couple months. It was, I think, midsummer. So you're a veteran of this live format. So you're going to have to show them the ropes here.
Please do.
Sure.
Okay, let's start with this. Steve, give us some background on yourself and your agronomy business.
Sure. Okay. Well, I started ag retail as well back in the days, Alberta Wheat Pool, and then into Agricor and Agricor United, and then into Cargill as a crop consultant. So I started Beyond Agronomy back in 2006. So that's 14 years, going on 15 years this year. And I supply crop production advice to farmers locally. I got basically 14 clients who've grown along the way, like 17 years. I'm now helping out the next generation, which is really great. And I run a farm as well, where I do a lot of test research and basically farming systems and technology, some practices, that sort of thing. So that really helps out on the agronomy side, and that's why we're here maybe today.
Yeah, and one of Canada's big pushers. You're kind of on the leading edge of trying to figure out how CTF could work in Canada. So that's one of your things you've done a lot of work on. That might be a future episode of the Agronomists, is talking about controlled traffic farming. I think that'd be a good one for sure. Deb, give us some background on your agronomy business.
Yeah, so I'm based in Dundalk, Ontario, and I've been crop advising in my own company since 2012. And we do field scouting, crop planning, soil sampling. We've moved into swap mapping now here in the past year, and working with a whole range of fabulous clients. Some very prime farmers in the region, and it's been going really well. And there seems to be endless demand for services, so it's been good.
Yeah, with even there's so much information out there, but people, I think some of the decisions got even more challenging, and so there's never been more need for consulting advice to help farmers make the right decision. The stakes get larger and larger, the money gets bigger, and a mistake can be more and more costly as time goes on. So I'm glad to have both of you here. I really, really appreciate you being on tonight's show. So as I mentioned, we are going to talk about on-farm / ag retail research trials. Deb, let's maybe start with you. Why do you think it's so critical? Because there's a lot of sources of information. Why do you think it's critical that farmers or agronomists themselves do some research trials to get that information developed by themselves?
Yeah, it's almost like cutting through the noise and getting to something that's just specific to their own operation. And yeah, the local trials are good. Regional trials are good. We have some phenomenal researchers, University of Guelph and OMAFRA here, but just cut through the noise and find out what works on your own farm, your own equipment, your own style of farming. Everyone's a little bit different and unique, and it really helps dial in what suits, a particular operation. So, there's certainly some challenges go along with that, but it's getting to the root of what works for you. Steve,
what do you think?
Yeah, no, I'll echo some of that for sure. It really comes down to, like, you can try any product, equipment. Really comes down to how that fits inside your farm and your system, right? So a lot of times we're introducing products or technology. I mean, it's good to see outside research on, how things perform elsewhere, but it really comes down to how are you going to manage that? How is that product or technology or equipment going to perform in your system? What do the economics look like? What do the logistics look like? So it really takes like on-farm research to drill that down properly. Otherwise, it's a best guess. Doing it yourself allows you to test it out, test the theories, and minimize that risk. Again, you talked about CTF. I mean, there's a leading edge and there's a bleeding edge, and you really try to balance the bleeding with what you're trying to accomplish, right? So again, back to having goals and setting goals for what you want to accomplish inside that research.
Yeah, Khalid makes a very good point. Local data can help growers to develop their agronomic portfolio, kind of make those real decisions based on the regionality. Because, we have seen cutbacks across the country and some of the things the feds are doing, some of the provinces. And so would you say, Steve, that there's never been a better fit or more of a need for this kind of work to be done?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the reasons we exist as consultants, I'll speak to Alberta, conservative government back in early 2000s under Klein. I mean, I guess the governmental or extension department, they were given less power or less responsibility, or just it was taken away from them to be able to, to do extension work, to disseminate that knowledge that they were learning. So those cutbacks led to a gap that I started to fill in the early 2000s. And it's only gotten worse. I mean, I think Alberta just laid off, unfortunately, over 176, 175 research staff and employees. So, man, that gap is even greater than it was, 5 months ago. So you look at the need for unbiased research, or people to talk to, people to go to for unbiased opinions and advice. I mean, it's never been greater. So that's why Deb said the demand keeps growing. It absolutely keeps growing. Yeah.
Ray. Sorry. Go ahead, Deb. Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think it even today, it goes one step past even the researchers. Like, you look at the registration process for products now, and where virtually every product needed to have a yield-based component, a performance-based component to it. That doesn't exist in some products now. It's really, is it harmful? And, the whole concept of does it work doesn't even fit into the registration process in some elements. So the onus really comes back to on-farm proof of concept and making sure it actually adds value in the business.
And I think we got to really make sure, though, that we get good information out. Just to sort of go through the motions and saying, "Hey, I'm doing on-farm research," or I've got trials all over the county. I'm like almost I should have a PhD. I'm doing so much research, but the output is crap. like, you're really not making better decisions. You're actually probably making worse decisions because your information, now you're making decisions based on information that's not very good. So
Yeah.
Deb, what are some of the things we need to consider before we get started here? Because, this afternoon, Peter Johnson was on our Real Ag radio show, and I wrote down Pete's question, or his comment, which was figure out what question I want to answer. Is it that simple before you start?
Oh, I mean, that's a good starting point, but there's a lot more to that. It's building the entire roadmap is got to be part of it, right through to implementation of, so you've got a question to answer, how best to answer that, what's the layout, the comparisons you're going to have, how many replicates you want to have, the size and scope of the entire project, who's funding it. Yeah, how are you, and then how are you compiling all that data when it's done? And I mean, it's a lot easier today than it was even 10 years ago. The tech on the equipment has made it simpler. Well, simpler, maybe that's still even debatable, but the tools are there to run these results and capture the treatments very easily. It's fairly, certainly automated. So, there's just so many facets to it before you ever hit the field and put it in motion. And I'll be the first one to say that I love research information. Actually doing research projects is, it's very time consuming, even just right down to giving yourself the time to go out and do it right. Go out to and do some ratings on it and some observations. And, it's not just about the yield measurement when you're done. There can be some very valuable pieces in between, and we often miss those steps.
Yeah, so that's such a good point. There would be a real opportunity here to have scope creep. You have to make this way more complicated than it needs to be, but at the same time, I think I just caught a point there, Deb, writing down what happened through the season because you're able to then take those characteristics or those points and compare them versus what the actual output, like yield, for example, quality at the end of the day, right, Steve?
No, absolutely. I think it is. There are so many nuances around on-farm research that you really have to try to simplify as much as possible. Like, you can talk about randomized replicated plots, and those are great, and you try to do those as much as you can. But the reality is, I mean, a lot of times it is just demonstrations to begin with. So a lot of times we try to dive deep into, randomized replication on plots, and a lot of times you have the best of intentions at seeding, and you do the randomized replication. Goes, oh yeah, right. I guess it starts with a commitment. What you really want to learn, and are you committed to learning with the execution of said plots, right? So we can go through the field selection. I mean, I think that's kind of table stakes. Everyone choose the right location, choose the right fields. What do you want to learn? Are you able to actually execute on it? Because maybe if you're not, then maybe on-farm research isn't for you, and maybe it is a neighboring or someone you can partner with that will do the research with you. It may not be perfect. It's not on your farm, but you may know someone who has a similar agronomy style, let's say agronomy system, right? So you can compare and contrast against yourself. So I agree. The tools are getting a bit easier to measure yield, measure, basically data. You got client and times. The challenge is in the time and the processing with the data. I mean, just to import a yield data or a CSV file or a .dat file from climate, which you then have to find a way to bring into SMS Advanced. I mean, it takes a lot of time even to set up the either prescriptions or set up the trials, and then on the processing side. So on-farm trials is probably the easiest part of the whole process, is just saying it. The rest of it is a lot of work. right? From beginning to end, execution. I mean, the simple part is, hey, what do you want to learn? Where do you want to put it? After you simplify that part, I mean, the rest it actually takes quite a bit of work.
Yeah. It's sort of like this. It's sort of like, you know what? I'm going to renovate the kitchen. And it sounds great. It sounds very manly, and I want to get into construction. I want to learn how to do this, and I've got it. I've watched enough HGTV renovation shows. I know what I'm doing.
Right.
And then you get about a third of the way into it. It's like, what the heck have I got myself into? I need someone to bail me out of this project.
Yeah, once the wall's down, you're.
Yeah. Hey, you know what, gang? Let's watch our first clip here. It is when I say the Real Agriculture Vault, I actually really mean it. This is an old video that was taken with Southern Alberta farmer Josh Fankhauser. And it's going way back in time. I think I should have wrote it. I think it was like 2012. And I know he is still to this day a big proponent of on-farm research and trials. Yeah, let's take a look at the clip and then we'll talk about it. Here is Josh Fankhauser from Southern Alberta.
What's so important about on-farm trials?
You can learn about what works good in your region and for your particular farm with your particular equipment for yourself, and also with the government cutting back research dollars, you can learn stuff that you can not find widely available online or that has not been done, and you just have the ability to do it yourself and at least get a rough idea. It's also a very handy tool for checking to see whether these products, which are somewhat controversial, some of the micros and stuff, whether they're actually working or not on your particular farm. Everybody's soil is different, so what may work in Lethbridge may not work here, or especially what may work in Northern Alberta is completely different in Southern Alberta.
So do you think it has a really big benefit from that regional aspect?
From the regional aspect, definitely. Like, I mean, we're here in Claresholm. If you look behind me, or behind the camera, you'll see the foothills. We're only a half an hour away here in the foothills. You can even grow a grain crop up there if you wanted to. And we're a little bit different microclimate, a little cooler, less heat units, wetter, shorter growing season. And it's great for some things, but it's just a completely different microclimate from Lethbridge. And it's completely different from even Calgary, right? So we can come up with stuff that works for us.
So why do you think more farmers don't do on-farm trials?
Time. It is a little bit of work, not so much in this field. Like right now, these two drills you see in the background here, they don't right now in this particular piece, but if they're doing research, the prescriptions would be preloaded into the field computer in the cab, and they would automatically do it. But I mean, all of that you got to set up in the winter. You got to get your research methodology figured out, and it just takes time. And I mean, you got to have the equipment. Like there, we got the field computer comes with the drill anyways, and the auto steer's there, so it's no extra money in equipment. You just got to learn how to utilize it. And I mean, admittedly, some guys don't have that equipment, and that's fine. But I mean, even just simple check strips you'll actually learn more from your mistakes and simple check strips than you do from some of the more elaborate trials I have ran.
So do you think it's a cost issue that's stopping farmers?
Cost and time. It does take time in your winter, and you're always thinking, and I mean, it does add, if you're not careful and you're not if you haven't had some practice, it can actually be a little stressful in the spring. I know the first couple of years we started these elaborate trials, the equipment's not working, right? It's supposed to work. You planned, and the equipment's not working, and that just adds one more stress to seeding or spraying or harvest, and you just learn to deal with it. And you know what? Sometimes you just end up, well, I'm going to combine or I'm going to seed, and you just forget about your trial and try again next year. Like it's one of those things, if it's not easy, don't do it. And you just try to strive to make it as easy as possible. So
how much land do you dedicate to an on-farm trial?
The individual strips, it all depends on what's working and what we're doing. Like I know we've done some stuff where, like if it's a fairly expensive product, we'll just do 1 tank or 2 tanks. Like seeding trials, it's usually, we try to go by the tank full. Like here, if we're doing a seed, we've done lots of inoculant trials and seed treatment trials, and like right now, if I mix up a batch in my seed treater, it'll fill each drill once. And so it all depends, like it'll be anywhere from, I mean, that's an 80-acre trial, right? And especially with two drills usually working separately, you get them in two spots of the field to get repeatability. And but it's got to be simple. And sometimes if it's a little more expensive, I'll mix it up for one drill. Spraying, it's usually a whole tank. Like we just do tank loads. Like we don't. I have one trial, which is a fertility trial, and it's very, very intensive, and that's as small as I've ever gone. I think they're 15-acre strips.
So how does a farmer get started with if they want to start on-farm trials?
The first step is to learn how to use your technology and see if your technology can do it. But I mean, the way we started mostly with the sprayer. And we're just going to try this chemical, and we do 80 acres of field with this chemical and 80 acres with another. And then you just pull it up on the yield map and see, right? And then we slowly moved into seeding, and just as I described, do one tank of this and then everything normal, right? And you just try one tank of the new product here and you see what shows up. And I mean, on the scale we're doing it, when you're taking 80 acres to do a trial, I mean, almost every piece of land I got has got some sort of trial on it, just because I'm evaluating so much stuff. But the advantage of it is I've evaluated, there is never a new input put on this farm anymore that has not gone through at least, it's got to have some research to back it up, preferably 3 years of site data. But every new input that ever goes in, well, I guess with the exception of canola varieties, we're not running full-scale variety trials. We kind of trust the seed growers on that one. But every other input, like every other wheat variety or pea variety, has all gone through trials. And that's how we evaluate, and it seems to work really well. And I mean, the big thing is you need a yield map and you need to calibrate it. And it's not so much the absolute numbers trends,
Lots of wildlife in that video. You could hear a fly, then there was a bird.
I've been attacked by one of those sandpipers in the background. That bird. Yeah, I've been dive bombed by one of those.
That was a Wheat School episode. You can find more episodes of the Wheat School at wheatschool.com. Big thanks to Syngenta Canada, C&M Seeds, and Alberta Wheat for their sponsorship. Steve, what did you hear in that video?
I just chuckled. I mean, so many. I think he flinched when he said, "It takes a bit of time." Yeah, Tim. And yeah, you end up with great intentions, and then it blows. It flies out the window by the end of the season. But and again, 15 acre trials, absolutely. Like, there's just sometimes, as an agronomist, you'll make a recommendation, and you'll say, you know what, I think we should try this. And then the next phone call you get is like, yeah, I did it on like 1,200 acres. You did it on 1,200 acres. What do you mean? Again, back to that leading edge, bleeding edge. There's an element of trust there. But what I heard from Josh was that, it takes time. The technology does make it can make it easier on the application side, as in when it's, when you load your prescription, it can turn on and off and do your strip trials for you. And then you can take that as applied data and then do the analysis later on. Again, that part. But he mentioned just simple check strips, like turning on and off. I mean, I think for the most part, when a manifold plugs full of seed plates phosphorus, and you don't apply phosphorus on 10 feet, on 70 acres or whatever the fill is going to be, there's a lot of learning that goes on there between maturity and tillering, and so you pay attention to those. So a lot of times, we introduce on-farm trials by accident, and I would say the majority of that happens, or that'd be the rule more than the exception.
Yeah, for sure. Deb, what did you think about the video?
Yeah, actually, he had some well thought out plans there, which is fantastic. But I think keeping it simple, that just totally resonates. That not complicating things intentionally. These things can just morph into something that's completely unmanageable, and the frustration mounts, and you wish you'd never done it in the first place. So one of the easiest trials that I see and that works so easy and simple on farm is just simple rate trials. I mean, a lot of the clients that I work with, they're typically looking to, move yields up a notch or productivity up a notch, or, that sort of thing. So rate trials come in real handy for that. Is, your standard seeding rate plus a higher seeding rate, your standard nitrogen rate plus a higher nitrogen rate. Those are so simple, and yet you can learn a tremendous amount from that at the end of the season. And the technology, you're just tracking it. There's really not a whole lot of implementation to happen there. And I'm so glad that we don't do 15-acre side-by-side trials here. We do 500 feet trials, and maybe a full pass with the sprayer, but that's about it.
Yeah, but it's still it's the same context, right? It's really the same thing. I really wonder if in Western Canada there is a little bit more. Steve sort of described the cowboy, where it's like, I did it on 1,200 acres. You may see maybe a little bit more of that out here. A lot of times that's unfortunate, as opposed to like, hey, congratulations for having a gut to do it. Hey, we got a few questions here. There was a point by Khalid that says we can also consider 3R approaches: replicated, randomized, and repeated for on-farm research. And I had in my notes here, I wanted to ask about replication across different soil types in the farm, different, flat versus hilly. How important is that, Steve?
Oh, it's really important. When I say that, depending on what your goals are, what your ability is to execute on those randomized replicated trials, I mean, they're few and far between. The reality is, for many of the people I work with, a lot of it is side by side. Sometimes you'll get 2 to 3 replicates in there. Not great, but gives you an idea on what needs to be done next, or whether we see responses or not. But ideally, you would want to see it on your sandy soil types, on your mid slopes. You'd want to see it on your loam versus your clay. So it's important. Again, it comes back to execution. So it does make it easier, like when we can build prescriptions, and we do, check strips in there, just our, let's say, regular rate versus our VR across landscapes, whether they're sandy, loam, mid slopes, hilltops. We introduce seeding rate trials and fertility trials. Sometimes we just shut off the fertilizer. Sometimes we plug manifolds, plug boots off. Just one or two come out in the yield, but you can definitely notice them.
Yeah. So Deb, if you look at your typical geography that you're working with, do you, as an agronomist, as a consultant, do you try to get trials for a product, say, or some of those rate sort of things you talked about? Do you try to get them all around the territory of where you're trying to consult, or how do you manage that?
No, from my, I mean, that would be really nice, Sean, and if you want to sponsor that.
Well, there's an idea, Deb. We got something to aspire to for 2021.
No, for me, it's more about, a producer will have a goal, a client will have a goal that they're wanting to try a new fungicide, try a new bean variety, they're mounting something new on their corn planter and they want to make sure it's working, that sort of thing. So the trials would be specific to a client, or maybe 2 or 3 clients would have a similar type project that we can, cross-reference things on. But really, it's more literally an on-farm trial specific to a client. They're looking to gain knowledge about the new treatment or the new process, and that's typically where I would focus my energy with. And like I said, quite often that means we've got 3 or 4 of those same treatments going out at multiple producers, and that gives us some scope to it. But I really subscribe to the keep it simple.
Yeah. Question here for you from Jeremy. What % of farms have an R&D budget? What is a reasonable farm research budget? And this could be just, budget may not be just monetary. Budget may be allocation of acres, I guess. Do you want to take a stab at that, Deb?
Well, you know what? I don't think, I could be wrong, but the average producer probably doesn't think of it in terms of that. It's literally a project that they're looking to learn from. But that said, that is one of the messages or discussions that I bring to the table is, okay, well, what are we testing this year? What are we what are you going to learn on this year, and at least stimulate that discussion on, is it same old, or are we trying something new? That planter's getting a little worn out. Are we looking at a different planting system, or bringing something in to test a new planting system, things like that, or a new tillage system? Easy enough to set up and do, and quite convenient to establish a treatment in and side by side. So while they maybe don't have a formal budget for R&D,
Right.
most would have some thought process there.
Yeah. Steve, what do you see in your area?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Among my clientele, or even in my area, no, there's no specific R&D budget or money allotted for R&D. It's about having the conversation about what's reasonable. So is, an added cost of a product that you don't normally use. A great example would be PGRs when we started playing around with them in 2012 or 13, right? They're now starting to take hold, and a lot more people are using them. But early days, they were $40 an acre. I mean, and for something we didn't know how to use, we were bringing these products for trial purposes at a horticulture. And so it came down to, it came down to sometimes $50 to $80 an acre on 80 acres. So, at $100, so $8,000. Sometimes it was $4,000, and that was reasonable in those times because it depended on the issue you were trying, or the problem you were trying to solve, right? In those cases, lodging was a big deal. I mean,
Yeah.
we were trying to push the envelope on nitrogen and other nutrition, and we had these varieties that couldn't stand very well, like on barley side and wheat side. So we were willing to take the risk at $8,000 for a research project on one field on 80 acres, and that was okay. Whereas some other products, you wouldn't want to kick a whole lot of money at it, just because the value doesn't seem there. Like you're not addressing a serious problem. So we're looking at plant growth regulators and nitrogen. Those are probably the two main ones we've been looking at for a long time.
Yeah. I love this quote. Pete said it on the radio today, and I believe it's at the bottom of his email signature. Ken Nixon, farmer in Ontario, it's his quote: "There are no mistakes in agriculture, only test plots." So there's lots
by
of
the highway.
Right by the highway, absolutely.
Always.
Yeah.
But
go ahead, Dad.
There can be a lot. When you get to the end of the season and you're looking at some yield maps through climate or what have you, or the op center, and you're going, wow, there's a strip there. What on earth is that about? And you get all these strips going on all these farms and trying to piece it all together. So some are a lot better at pinning those details and retaining them so that we can truly, figure out what we're assessing when we're done. And that leads to next year's project.
Okay. Yeah. And we're gonna talk about the analysis here in a second. What I want to do is I want to show our next clip, which is with Sean Brenneman. He is with Syngenta, kind of providing the consultants, the ag retail side of analyzing some of the results and working with the farmer customer. So let's take a look at the next clip. Here we go. I just got to find it. There we go.
So Sean, the Ontario corn trial results are out. Lots of good information there, but there's piles and piles of plot results out there as well. And I think growers are always interested in, okay, I've got the trials results for the Ontario corn trials. I've got a lot of plot results. How do I put them together to help me make some decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, I was just at a farmer's place the other day, and we were sitting down, and he took me to the coffee table and showed me this stack of plot results from 8 different companies that are out there, and saying, one says theirs are the best, the other says theirs are the best, and they all contradict each other. At the end of the day, what do I believe, and what should I actually be looking for when I'm picking the products that I want to grow on my farm the next year? And it's tough because growers are inundated with information from all different types of sources. And I think at the end of the day, one of the things I recommend is, pick something local. That's where you start off. Look for local plot results, those plots that are more representative for how you farm in your area.
When it comes to local, are we talking as well soil types? When you were looking at local data, what exactly are you benefiting from?
Yeah, soil types are one thing, but environmental conditions, weather patterns, even just 10 miles can make a big difference at the end of the day if there's different soil type differences. So trying to understand, what are the soil types that this plot was grown on, and then what were the weather conditions? Are they conducive to how, is going on my farm? Even back to, that plot information has so much information on it. What was the tillage? What was the previous crop? Those are all things to consider when you're actually trying to evaluate, is this plot representative for what goes on my farm?
And obviously there's yield information there, but it's just not yield. Everything, test weights, moisture, so important.
Absolutely. But very critical there, because I know I've worked with enough people that they just go down that plot list until they come up, 190, 190, 195, 200. That's the one I'm going to grow next year. And in a lot of cases, look at the other information. What was the moisture for that corn? What was the test weight? Was it 4 or 5 points wetter than everything else? So it was probably a couple hundred heat units more than anything else in that plot. Or was the test weight a grade 4 or 5 or sample? So those are things to also look at. Just don't make yield your final determination. Look at all the factors and put it all in the context.
Another thing is populations, right? So important, because depending on how what the population of that plot was, may be very close or very different from how you farm.
Yeah, absolutely. Hybrids will respond to different environments they're grown in. So if you've got a plot where it's at 28,000 plants per acre, but you're growing at 36,000, how that hybrid, if you grow it on your farm, is going to act quite a bit differently at that 36,000 versus the 28, how it did in that local plot. So really make sure that you're looking at all the factors that are involved.
And the final thing you say, hey, ask questions. Make sure you're asking your sales rep to sort of bring this home to your farm and make it useful for you.
Absolutely. Anything you can do to clarify, whether it's the agronomic practices, what's the population, does it respond to a fungicide, is there anything else I should be concerned about? Those are all things that ask your sales rep, ask your local sales rep, ask your agronomist, and they'll give you the best information they can to just make sure that you're getting the right decisions for your farm.
Oh, great stuff. I just smile as I watch all these videos and pick up on stuff I missed the first time. Great stuff. Hey, Deb, what did you hear there?
Yeah, there's a lot of, at a certain point in the season, especially, in regards to seed, it can become overwhelming. There's so much coming at you, and how much of it is really truly meaningful and applicable to your own business. And in Ontario, at least anyway, that's a very large segment. The corn companies, the bean companies are constantly doing their side-by-side trials and evaluating products on farm, and those micro environments, and it's incredibly important that the grower, the farmer, the cooperator is getting what they want out of those trials too. They're donating the land and the time and the effort and equipment. And it's we're seeing fewer and fewer checks in some of these treatments, and fewer and fewer competitive comparisons in these treatments. If it's all one brand in a plot with no competitors, are you really doing evaluations there? Again, it comes down to what's the grower's goal, and private research for an ag company, maybe that's nice to have, but I think there's a lot more out there that growers could be doing in regards to their own information that they want to learn about those varieties and hybrids. And part two of that is get away from the stack of endless plots, and the agronomists, the reps at the retail, they can drill down, and if you literally have sandy fields or clay fields, get to the subset that actually pertains to you, and all of those numbers go into a database. And that's the benefit of those tools, is to drill down and get into something that actually pertains to your farm, and just put the stack away.
Yeah,
it's not.
Yeah, and Steve, what I heard there too is, I think Sean has a really good approach in terms of there's a lot of noise. So try to assist the farmer customer. Part of your role as the consultant, the agronomist, is to try to fight through all that with them. And like I said at the top of the show, having some of that data based on some of what's happening actually on that farm is just such an important part of that.
absolutely. I think the example we can take is, a lot of times it is the hybrid research that we've done, a fairly good job. We've been doing it a long time, and I'm speaking to canola mainly, sometimes soys when you introduce a few hybrids in there on silage corn for us. I mean, we're further north. We don't take any corn for grain, but a lot of times silage. But the canola variety trials, they're a bit of a pain, to meter in and calibrate and do your replicates. But man, we do learn so much, and partnering with a seed company, making that phone call did more about hybrids from a specific company, whether it's BASF or Pioneer or Cargill. So I think out of my client base, I have four customers who have, maybe even five actually, who do hybrid research for companies, right? So they get to see it right there on their farm, and they're allotted a few bags of seed. They get to do the randomized replicated, and then we get to walk through during the growing season and watch insect pressure, watch maturity, watch canopy closure, watch maturity. So we get to watch a stature, lodging. I mean, we get to watch them kind of real time through the growing season. And I think if we could take that approach to other, agronomic practices, then we'd be away. I mean, we could do that with PGRs. We can do that with fungicides. We can do that with all sorts of things. If we can do it with canola seed, right?
Well,
we can do it with others.
Let's talk about analyzing results now. And I think obviously yield is important. We can never forget yield, but there's a lot of different angles and ways to look at different data points. And Steve, you sent me a picture. We're getting super fancy tonight, everybody. Look out, watch this.
Oh, yeah.
Steve, you gave me
watch
this.
It. Epic.
Oh, we're getting really special tonight. These are big time graphics now. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a VR nitrogen trial from a bunch of different angles. Is that correct? Talk about it.
So what it is, it's at my place. It's I just taking the process from start to finish. I was actually talking about soil moisture and building a VR map based on electrical conductivity and soil moisture at my place this year. But I walked through the process on this slide to show, okay, here's an aerial image. If you want to choose a plot, if you look at that photo in the top left, I'm not going to choose the north half of that field to do a trial in northeast, right? There's some low spots. I mean, it's just not representative. So I can choose where I want. And then I look to the right with that orangey brown map. That's an EC map. That's just shallow. Just shows me soil type. You can tell where my soil type kind of changes based on EC. And then that really pretty map with the 3D, I mean, that's a soil moisture map. So that's actually telling me how many millimeters of soil of moisture there is in the soil in that field. And it kind of follows that EC. It's kind of interesting. And then next to it, there's my VR map. I built a variable rate nitrogen map, just spraying on or streaming on UAN, so liquid nitrogen, kind of like 8 to 9 gallons, upward of 17 gallons an acre. And then bottom left, I have like climate. So climate field view I subscribe to. It just shows me in season imagery. And you can see that block. If you can look at that bottom left image, that variety trial, basically you see that white area through the middle. There's 50 acres of a variety called Sheba beside Brandon, a very popular hard red spring. And Sheba is a newer variety. I wanted to test it out. So there was a maturity difference, and that showed up in the NDVI. Showed up in grain moisture as well. And then we moved to my as applied data, which is really important. It makes it easier to pick out the yield data, right? Because when I can click on those depending on your software, like SMS Advanced I'm using. I can click on any one of those swaths where I applied, and it'll give me, I can query that, and it'll show me what the moisture is, what the grain moisture was, what the yield was. So I can then start to analyze the treatments that I've made. And that far right one is the yield data. Essentially, you can see those blue strips where the yield is higher. I didn't put the yield results on there, but again, it comes down to a process of what you want to look at and where you want to, see it.
Yeah.
But again, that's not simple. Like, that's a lot of data.
Yeah. But I like the visual aspect of it. And Deb, you pointed this out earlier. Sometimes, you go through the whole growing season, but then when you get to this point, we're actually seeing, the differences in the colors and just the visual aspect of it. Some things can pop out at you that maybe you weren't even aware of through the entire season. This is where the real work happens in the field, but this is the super critical part to take the data, turn it into information. I love this stage.
I do too, and what I'm really struck on is this NDVI imagery. It's, if your treatments and your trials are big enough, you've got a wide enough or long enough treatment in dimension, it'll show up on the imagery, and you can follow that along all season. And even if you're going out to actually put boots on the ground and check the field and physically look at the treatments, you know exactly where you are, exactly what treatment you're standing in. There's no paper in your back pocket leading the way. It's all captured right there and on your tablet or phone. And it's just streamlining it. And even if you don't have time to go out to the field to actually make those observations, you've got it captured in the imagery, and that there's differences showing up at key times of development, and that's pretty good backup.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter Johnson, Wheat Pete, has a question. Hey, Steve, how long did it take you to go through all that data? Now, you're doing the same thing that Josh did about the time thing.
Right? It's the twitch.
You just did the time twitch.
Jeepers. There's not enough time. Like, that's one bloody field. Like, I think as opportunity, right? So how long did it take, Pete? It took probably an hour and a half to, like, from start to finish, just to pull together that imagery, that data, and then I can import that. Again, I mean, it is getting easier. I've got a John Deere combine, but I'm not on operations yet, so I have to export it to my ag leader monitor or my Trimble monitor. So it takes some time just to move data around, but that's getting easier with climate and with operations. People can, and Agfinity for Trimble, or for ag leader. So you can pull that data in and out pretty easy, but it still takes time to import and then process and then query, for randomized replicates. So again, that's an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of my time, could be upwards of 3 for one field. So you multiply that across, 14 customers and, 14 or 15 fields or more. There's a lot of value for it, but again, it's got to be like a January timeframe when you're a little on the slower side and you've actually got time to process that data, and then to find out that it's junk data, because yield data is such a, what is it? It's a unicorn. Like, really good yield data is a unicorn. So to have it, that's not full of gaps or, representative, it can be few and far between, unfortunately. So that's why I chose to do it myself. Yeah, because I can take the time and I scale down. I don't, I'm not a mega farmer. I'm more of a research guy. Yeah.
Deb, do you find, because you're doing some stuff with SWOT maps, right, Deb? You said.
Yeah. Yes.
And so there's some visual outputs there. They're tied into some of the climate API, I believe.
Yes.
Do you find that showing your customers the visual side of some of that stuff is an easier way to showcase the results than just a bunch of tables and maybe a few graphs?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, eventually you really need to actually get down to the numbers. That's the bottom line here is what is it putting in your pocket, a specific treatment or trial. But the visual that you're seeing on what?
Peter Johnson's like, Deb. Peter Johnson says, when do you ever slow down? Okay, define my definition of slowing down and what others are.
Well, he's on high speed, so you gotta continue, Deb. Go ahead.
Go for it, Deb.
Yeah,
Peter.
I mean, you can see the visuals quite nicely, but eventually you got to put the numbers to it. Is you can have a visual that's maybe, depending on the scale, you're showing a 2 bushel advantage, and maybe that's financially feasible, or maybe it's not. So you still need to do that math at the end of the day, but at least with a visual, you can see it readily. You know it's doing something, and you know you have to do that follow-up piece to it. But one of the themes that's kind of gone through this entire conversation is sort of the role of the support person, the role of the crop advisor, the ag retail, the agronomist in working with producers to put the trials together, learn what they're observing, how does it apply, and then digging into the data when they're done to see what you can actually pull out of that and use for next year's business. And it's a team process. Anytime we're setting up these trials, it's a team process. You might have the manufacturer, yourself, the grower, various other operators on a farm helping out. And it's pretty important to have that support network to hopefully at the end of the cycle walk away with some meaningful information.
Yeah, here's a question from Jeneth. Thanks a lot for watching. She's watching on Twitter. Do you ever give up on a trial due to errors, or do you try to salvage the data? Because this seems like this would be a common problem where I screwed up on that. I shouldn't have done that halfway through. What do you do? Who wants to tackle that one? Steve, you want to maybe give us your experience?
More often than not, it's not necessarily the screw ups. The screw ups actually create the plots a lot of times. For us, it's hail. It's weather events that really skew the data the most, right? Like especially, and maybe Ontario too, right? And just especially being so close to the rock. I mean, it's just the hail events and really wreak havoc on your plots. So it's really disheartening to have plots, all over the place, even like so many farm trials all over the place. But the swaths, like all 5 or 6 hailstorms that come through, take a piece of everybody, right? So do you salvage it? A good case in point would be over at Olds College. So they've got their smart farm there. I do their some of the agronomy work there on the smart farm. So we had hail again this year. So we had Alex Milnachuk. So he's a multispectral specialist, right? So he actually pieced together. We went out and did some kernel counts, and we recreated what that yield potential would have been using kernel counts and imagery. So that was a really unique way to salvage that yield data because it was really important to that farm, right? They use that as part of their curriculum. So we were able to salvage some imagery. So, but other than that, aside from the specialists like that, sometimes you just have to write it off, and it happens more often than not.
Yeah. Deb, how about you?
You know what? You kind of just got to roll with it, and that's part of the beauty of keeping it simple in the first place. Is that if treatment 4 and 5 get reversed, as long as you capture that they're reversed, you carry on, and or if it doesn't emerge as well as it was supposed to, as long as it's reasonably uniform across the entire project. Okay, good enough. And you can still measure something at some point throughout it. You may not get to your final objective, but there's still things to observe. And we had a canola trial this year. We were measuring some new phosphorus products on starter trials, and it was incredibly hot and dry, and we had some poor emergence across those treatments, partly because it was dry, partly because it was the fertilizer. But we watched that all the way through, and how well the different treatments branched and filled in, and how well the plants recovered, and that actually became part of the trial. So you can salvage something usually.
Here's the reality. That's farming, and why would it be any different if you're running some research trials? Shit happens, and you gotta if you can roll with the punches and make it work, all the better. Question here from Jeremy Boychin from Alberta Wheat watching on Facebook. What factors are most important to help increase the chances of trial success besides eliminating weather events, which we of course can't? Deb, you want to tackle that one?
Increase the chances of success. I think having that field ready plan, that you've put the thought process together in the winter. Everybody's on board. Everybody kind of knows what their role is to get this to happen, I'm kind of a details kind of a person. So that to me increases the chances of success. If it's already put together, you just have to implement, and usually you're in pretty good shape at that point.
Steve?
Commitment, really. A lot of times it comes down to commitment. And if you're not committed to taking that all the way to the end, all the way to the goal line, then I don't see any other way to, I don't see any other way to really improve the potential outcomes, as in try to get it. Yeah, just what builds successful trials. I mean, again, it comes down to successful execution. So aside from that, I don't know what else to add.
Well, and this is where technology, right? Like, especially if we're taking, if yield is kind of like what we're trying to measure, let's say in research project A, the ability to collect some of this yield data, assuming we've calibrated properly, that's an important part of that.
Mm-hmm.
But, it kind of gets us around maybe having to rely on that way wagon because, there's so many yield trials that are abandoned at harvest because harvest can have a lot of adversity. And so it's just like, we don't have time for that. Let's just combine it all, right? It happens. And so maybe that's an example where technology maybe helps a little bit. I don't know.
It does, absolutely. Like, I've got several clients that have adopted, John Deere operations. And I tell you, it does make things really simple. I mean, once they've got their 1, 2, 4 combines calibrated, they're collecting really good data. Relatively speaking, you can see it's not full gaps and the header down, and it just takes a lot less processing. So, you know what? It is getting easier. Climate as well. It is getting easier. Yeah. So, technology is definitely helping us advance. Yeah. On the processing side, I think a lot of times that's where it comes down to, right? It takes so much time.
Hey, good question here coming in from Earl, who's watching on Facebook. Earl says, what factors have driven false positives? Trial on top of past trials? ? Who wants to tackle that one?
Do you want to, Deb? I could tackle that too.
Go ahead.
I'll be brief.
Okay.
I'll be brief. So my place, like, sometimes I want to expand the farm a little bit more just so I have a few more fields to trial, because after 10 years, you've done, like, I had a great example. In 2016, I bought a side dress toolbar and I started side dressing canola on 24-inch spacing. My drill is 12-inch spacing. So I applied 60 pounds of nitrogen at bolting in between the rows, worked great. Well, that nitrogen didn't necessarily, it cycled through the system, but it took 2 years to show up. So 2 years later, I did that in wheat, but did that in canola. And 2 years later, I grew malt barley. And in that malt barley trial, I had a spike in protein on 40 acres. And I thought, 40 acres? Why is my protein in malt barley 13.8? Doesn't make any sense here. And it was a 40-acre plot where I'd done a strip trial 2 years previous that showed up, right? So that nitrogen kind of cycled through, immobilized, and then worked its way back into the system 2 years later. And then I grew canola. Then I grew fava beans on canola stubble because everyone does that. And then I grew malt barley on fava bean. I grew malt barley on fava bean stubble because everyone does that. So it ended up the fava beans never used it. So I side dressed that 40 acres, and then that nitrogen wasn't used by the fava. And then 2 years later, it's in the malt barley crop, and I'm like, what is that? Oh, how could it possibly be there? But again, back to Earl's question. How's it going, Earl? It happens. It happens a lot, right? Like mistakes from years ago. Like you can have over applications of phos or overlaps, or a lot of things can do false positives.
Okay, but to add to that, Ray asks or makes a good point here, is that I would think keeping things fairly simple. Many times growers layer treatment upon treatment and confound their own experiment to point of having data that defies accurate interpretation. And this is an important part too, I think, Deb, is make sure you're measuring one variable at a time, because if you're changing multiple things, you have no idea why it's a negative result or a positive result, because you have no idea really what the variable was that had the impact.
Oh, totally. And I mean, I'm guilty of that myself. You want to try and get the most possible information out of a trial, and at the end of the day, you end up with less, just because of how you've designed it or how you've compounded the complexity to it. And having a sounding board that you can bounce it off of. And we have some phenomenal researchers here within OMAFRA and University of Guelph. And if I'm writing something up with a client, and are we actually going to get to what we want to answer in the first place out of a trial design? And lots of people to float that by and get that feedback on, and maybe you scrub it and start again.
There's a comment here, or a question here from Mario, based on, I think, something that I said as I close the door to let my dog back in. Mario has a comment here about, we're live, things happen. Do you think you can really compare different hybrids using the yield monitor unless you calibrate it every time? I have seen major difference of yield monitor versus a scale when comparing some side by sides. Deb, this is something that I said. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you can, actually. I think you can. The yield monitor is quite effective. If you're trying to split hairs on 3 or 4 bushel yield differences, you're probably a wash, right? Like there's no significant difference at those types of levels. But in Ontario, we have so much variability here, and so much, differences among genetics, that's usually not a big issue. It's not unusual to see treatments and hybrids with 20 and 25 bushel, 30 bushel differences from start to finish. And I think your yield monitor is good enough for that. We just can't always be going across the scale or using a scaled wagon or buggy or whatever. That's a nice to have, but we can't always accommodate that. So we got to rely on that yield monitor, and folks that are doing it right, they've got it calibrated and hopefully within 1%. And that's pretty good. Those are pretty good specs.
Yeah. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, same deal. You know what? Yeah, weigh wagons, scales on the carts. I mean, if you could keep it simple and load into the cart time, a lot of times that's better than yield data. But if you have enough replicates, and 3 or more, a lot of times we're doing those variety trials and even strip trials. We're just, with enough data, with enough strips, you begin to build confidence in that 2 bushel, 3 bushel difference, on using yield data. And I get where he's coming from. I mean, yield data is not great, it's not perfect, but man, the relative difference, if you see that consistency over, a number of plots, then you get some confidence in it.
Yeah, it sort of speaks to the replication point. The more replication, the more confidence you could have in possibly some of the issues with the variability. So I think that's hold on, I'm finding Khalid made the point earlier. We can the 3 R's: replicated, randomized, and repeated. And replicated is an important part of that, especially if you are going off of the yield monitor. In the case of a yield trial, if you can believe it, we're at the end. We're at a time. So it's absolutely unbelievable. It goes so fast here. Hey, Steve, I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. Good to see you, Deb. Yeah.
Steve, what's the website for Beyond Agronomy?
It's actually beyondagronomy.com.
Oh, well, that's easy enough. There you go. Perfect.
Yeah,
that is Steve Larocque of Beyond Agronomy and Deb Campbell of Agronomy Advantage. Deb, thanks a lot for joining us. What's your website?
agronomyadvantage.ca.
I like how you guys kept it simple. That is really so nice.
There's a common theme.
I really do appreciate it. It's keeping it easy on the host, that's for sure. Hey, Deb, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. It's great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
Okay, great stuff tonight, everybody. I really appreciate you joining us here for the Agronomists. The interaction from the audience, fabulous stuff. I appreciate your questions, keeping our our panelists, our experts on their toes every single week. Remember, tomorrow morning, go to realagriculture.com/agronomists and you can get your CCA credits. Also, you can go there and you can subscribe to our agronomist email, where we'll make sure we send you an email to remind you that this show is going to happen. Also, the next day you get an email reminding you that to sign up for your credits. So it's like a little concierge service for you. We're taking care of you. So also remember that we are every Monday night in prime time, 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain, and we greatly appreciate you being here this week. Thank you very much for getting real and getting connected with the agronomists, and we'll see you again